The hard problem of consciousness. The hard problem of consciousness refers to the challenge of explaining why and how physical processes in the brain give rise to subjective experiences, or qualia. The entire framing of this so-called problem is based on the fallacy of begging the question. It assumes the conclusion of the mind-body distinction in Cartesian dualism. The actual hard problem of consciousness is for the mystic, spiritualist, or believer in the immaterial or supernatural realm to prove how their axiom or assumption can affect a material or physical brain. Specifically, how can an immaterial essence, property, or entity affect a material or physical brain or body? We know that only material causes can have an effect on the material. The so-called hard problem essentially seeks to explain something that isn't there. In reality, it is quite simple: there is no problem. However, another hard problem exists in metaphysics. Why, when we see rainbows, have we never found a pot of gold? Is this evidence that leprechauns have supernatural properties that evade our current testing methods? Or is it possible that this flawed assumption is not a hard problem, but rather an impossible problem when searching for evidence of something that doesn't exist? Qualia. The transformation from sensory stimulus to qualia involves several steps. 1. Detection. Sensory receptors detect stimuli, example light hitting the retina. 2. Signal transmission. The receptors convert the stimuli into electrical signals, which travel through neurons to the brain. 3. Processing. The brain processes these signals in various regions, integrating them to form a coherent perception. What we refer to as consciousness or the self/soul is nothing more than the experiences or qualia generated by the brain as it processes and represents sensory stimuli. There is no user of the TV, rather, data is transmitted via electrical signals to each pixel, creating the visual image or representation displayed on the screen. This is equivalent to qualia or conscious experience. You are this process. Some argue that a TV has no qualia, only the conscious human that experiences the TV does. They assert that the soul is what experiences qualia from the human body, not the body being conscious by itself. The human body is akin to a TV, necessitating a conscious agent observing the screen for subjective experience to occur. However, this argument can be easily refuted with a few straightforward questions. When is the soul ever outside of the body, watching and hearing the body? What sensory organs, such as eyes or ears, does this disembodied soul possess that would allow it to watch the body? These inquiries expose the original argument's reliance on logical fallacies, specifically begging the question and false equivalence. Conclusion. What we call consciousness, the self, or the soul is a derivative of the functioning brain and can be demonstrated by testable and repeatable evidence that 1. Every night, when we enter deep sleep, the self, or consciousness doesn't exist. There are no sensory experiences, no qualia, no willful responses, and no memory. 2. Every time someone is knocked out, choked out, or passes out, they lose consciousness. Again, there are no sensory experiences, no qualia, no willful responses, and no memory. 3. A doctor can use general anesthetics to induce unconsciousness. In this state, there are no sensory experiences, no qualia, no willful responses, and no memory. 4. Drugs and alcohol are chemicals that alter the brain and thus affect our conscious experience, sensory responses, and often memory. 5. Brain damage physically alters or removes certain conscious experiences, such as imagination, memory, and motor skills. 6. Alzheimer's disease alters personality traits and memory. These multiple angles demonstrate that what we refer to as consciousness, the self, or the soul is not a permanent foundation residing inside the body as the driver or a ghost in the machine. Rather, it is an impermanent, fleeting, and transient derivative of the functioning brain. This delusion of the brain constitutes a narrative or story we create from the sensory experiences of this physical body.